Are we are now recording. So welcome to the recording of this tutorial. So different nodes. So these are called nodes, right? So this node in reality is a tiny block of code that's hidden behind a visual, interface that does something. When you first load nodes on here that require some level of input, they will pop up with this, kind of little, they'll be kind of this orangey color, and they'll have the little notice above it, which basically saying, hey, this isn't collecting any data right now, meaning it's not working. It's a warning. It requires a bit of data in order to function. If you see a version of this that is, let me see, actually, no, can I force it? Let me see if I can force an error. It's not letting me do it. If it's red, I can't think of how to force an error right now. If it's like, if this is red, that means you have an input, but it is not functioning properly. Something is broken, and it'll give you, if you hover over the little message box, it'll usually give you a brief explanation of what's going wrong in your definition, right? When you create, so these are called nodes. So this is kind of a geometry node, right? So this is a point. There's all kinds of them. There's curves, there's planes, there's arcs. So these are all geometry parameters. This kind of node here is this node, you can see, can have an input and an output. It can also not, we'll see here shortly, it can also just have an output. So meaning that you don't need to input something in here. There's other ways that you can get information into this node. This here is called, which is a slider. It's a number slider. Comes from, I actually know where the number slider, oh, there it is, from the input. So these are different input nodes. And some of these over here are also input nodes. Like this is technically an input node. These basically kind of force data into something, right? It takes a number and puts it in, gets the number. Or this one is generating a number based on a slider that I slide back and forth. Some of these nodes you can double click inside of, like the number slider is probably the most common node that you'll see, or like input node that you'll use. You can double click inside of them and you can kind of change how the numbers function, right? So for this slider right now, it is just a floating point number. I can change it to integers, right? So I can say, oh, I want it to just be integers, and I can say the max range is 100. And if I wanted to, I could put a minimum range, and I could also set like its default value to 50. I hit OK, and now you'll see that, okay, it's automatically 50. And if I hover over it, you'll see it describes what's happening inside of it, right? So it's saying that its current value is 50, its upper limit's 100. It's currently set to an integer function, so it'll only go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way up to 100 and no further. These nodes, so for example, I told you we talk about the panels. This is something you might use. This is just basically allows you to see what's happening. There's this bit of code here that's happening inside of this, inside of these nodes, and this panel it doesn't actually do anything other than display the information, right? So if I was to plug this into here, you would see, oh, I have the number 48 popping out of this. If I change this, 21, it says number 21 is coming out. It's not very useful for a number slider, but for a more complicated node, it could be very useful to see what's coming out of it, so you know what it looks like, what kind of information you're pulling from it. So they're useful to kind of just, and if I were to pull something out of this side, it's just passing through, right? So this number 21 is going in here. It's displaying what it is, and it passes out the other side, still the number 21. Nothing's changed about it. This is literally just a display, nothing more. This is also an input node, but it looks different than the panel. So you can see if I hover over it right now, it has the error. And if I hover, it says empty number parameter. And then if I hover over this, it's saying I haven't collected any data, right? So I could plug in this node to here. The error goes away. And if I add a new, and I guess we probably should go over how to plug things in, right? So if you hover over the little nub at the end here, you'll see the arrow changes to kind of the wire. And if I click, hold, and if I just click once, like one click, nothing happens. You have to click and hold, and then you can drag this around and plug it in somewhere. So if I plug that into there, you'll see that that's just the number 21. If I change both of them, you'll see that they're both changing the same because this number is just passing into here. It's a number and it's popping out the other side. But another thing I can do with this, so to unplug something, so if I don't want this to plug in anymore, there's kind of two ways you can do that. You can right click and you can disconnect. And I can pick which wire. So I could say, oh, I want to disconnect the number 1. I can click that and I can disconnect. Or I can hold down Control, and you'll see that the cursor changes to a red arrow with a minus sign. And I can unplug it from there by holding Control and going back to that node. Right now, as you can see, no data is being collected. But another thing I can do to kind of push a number into this is I can right click and I can add, I can set the number. So I can say, oh, I want this number to be 38. And I can say commit changes. You'll see that now I have the number 38 popping up right here. So this is just the number 38, nothing more, nothing less. I can also, if I wanted to plug more than one thing, so if I was to plug this into here, it unplugs the slider, right? So it automatically unplugs. But if I wanted to plug more than one thing into this panel, I can hold down the shift and you'll see that changes to a green arrow with a plus sign, and I can plug that in that way. And now you'll see that this panel is showing, this is your first example of a list, right? So I have a list of two numbers. I have 41 and 38. Lists, this is a kind of important bit of information that you'll probably need to rethink through many times. Lists in Grasshopper always start at 0. So the first item in a list is in the 0 position. So if a list has 2 numbers in it, it's 0 and 1. If it has 10 numbers in it, it goes from 0 to 9, right? So if you typed in, I want to see the 10th item in this list, it would get nothing. You would get an error because there's not a number 10. The 10th item in the list is actually in the 9 position, right? So that's important to remember down the line. But so that's your basic first list. That's the panel. 2 different input parameters. Any questions about those few basic things? Okay, so let's show, so this kind of parameter here, or this guy right there. I'm trying to remember what they call this, what its actual name is. It is, they would call, they would call this kind of node a component node, right? It requires, so it's going to do something. It's going to process information and create something. So, so for example, this one is to create a box, a rectangular box. And if I were to plug, I wonder if I can generate an error. So you can see here how I plugged in something into that box. I plugged this number slider into the box, and it turned red, and it looks all menacing. And if I hover over this, you know, it's not converting. Data conversion failed. Something's wrong with the data that's coming into here. Does anybody have an idea of why this is? Speak up as to why that error is occurring.
It doesn't know the units, maybe.
It needs a number box, it looked like it said. It said something about failed with number box.
So,
Or
go ahead.
when you hovered over the smaller red box, I think it.
Dane, is there any way you could
Rectangle.
you could change the display of the nodes to see what what R stands for?
So, I don't believe so. I don't actually 100% know for sure. But if I hover over the R or the H, it'll give you a basic description of what that thing is, right? So if I hover over that R, it's basically saying, hey, the R means I need a rectangle. So let's unplug this for a second. Let's go back to Rhino for a second here. So if I were to create a box, a cube, right, or extruded rectangle in Rhino, what would I need to do? I would come over to my solid tool for a rectangle, and the first thing it says, oh, I need the first corner of the base. So you can actually think through how you might build something in Grasshopper by actually trying to build one of those things in Rhino. So if I want to create my box, I can, all right, I'm gonna check my first corner. I got my first corner. Now it needs the other corner. Okay, I'm gonna click that. And now it needs a height. So then I extrude it to the height, right? So I created a rectangle on the, I created a rectangle by, clicking the first corner and the second corner, and then I extruded it up. So that's how I create it by hand in Rhino. So if I wanted to, do the same thing, build the same kind of box. So let's actually make this a box that's a little easier. I want to make it, 50 feet by 50 feet. Oops, I don't want a box. I want a box. So I'm going to go 50 feet that way, 50 feet this way, and 50 feet up. So that's a 50 by 50 by 50 box cube. So if I wanted to do that same thing, but in Grasshopper, I would use, let me just delete this. We'll go through it step by step. I'll delete all this. I would go to my surface tab, and I would go to my primitive shapes, and I would say, okay, what kind of box? How do I want to make this box? Do I want to make the box by a rectangle, or do I want to make it by defining 2 points, right? Because that's, if you click over here in, isn't there a box by corner? There's a way to create a box by 2 points. Yeah, right here. So like by selecting 2 points and creating a box that way. So there's different ways to create a box in Rhino, but we'll create it the same way that we created this one. So come to my primitives, I'll say, okay, I want to make a box. And sometimes it helps to, especially in the beginning when you're trying to create simple shapes, is starting with what you think is the last thing you need to do, the last step. The last step is the box. So it's like, okay, I want to create this box, but I need inputs, right? So it's a component node, so I need to figure out what those inputs are. The inputs are similar to the ones that we did over here, right? So if I hover over the R, it says, oh, I need a base rectangle. If I hover over the H, it says, I need a height, I need a box height. So how do I get those? Does anybody have an idea of how some of the options I could do to get the rectangle. Two main ways is I can build a rectangle inside of Rhino already that I use to plug into here, or I could build the rectangle inside of Grasshopper first. So if I go to curve and I go to primitive, down here you'll see that there's a rectangle option. So I want to create a rectangle. And if I click here, I get all these different options, right? So some of these nodes are, you have to use. Some of these nodes have to be, something has to be plugged in, but not all of them necessarily need to be plugged in, right? So you can see here I have 4 options. I have what's the base plane of my rectangle, what's the X dimension, what's the Y dimension, and what's the radius if we wanted to fillet the corners. So, but you can see if I hover over this, it says one locally defined value, and then underneath that it says world XY. That means it's defaulting to XY. And you can actually even see over here that I have the plane. It's showing me what plane that rectangle is going to be on. That red doesn't actually exist in Rhino. It only exists as a kind of a preview of what we're doing, right? If I hover over this, it has a locally defined value, -1 to 1, Y's -2 to 2, and the radius, the value is defined as 0. So right now, if I were to plug this in, you'll see nothing plugged into this rectangle. It has created a extruded shape. Because if I hover over this H, you'll see that this is locally, if I click on it, or one locally defined value is 0 to 10. So it's basically saying with no information plugged in other than this to this, the R to the R, that all of these default values, it's on the XY plane. The X dimension goes from -1 to 1. The Y dimension goes from -2 to 2. So you can see that it's longer in the Y direction than it is in the X direction. It's not currently, doesn't have any filleted radius. It's plugging into here, and its default value is 10, so it's extruding up 10. But we probably don't want that. We probably do not want that kind of rectangle. If you do, then you lucked out. So we might start to plug in some of these dimensions, right? So I might use, does anybody know what we need to, anybody have an idea of what we might need to plug in to make it a different size?
Would you use a slider?
Slider's definitely an option. So we can go to parameters, we can go to input, we can put in a number slider. So we could use this this number slider only goes to 1, and it's like a floating number value. If I double click in here, I want to change this to just an integer for easiness. I'm going to say 25 is the max, and we'll say that we'll put it somewhere here. 13 is the default. So you see that we have a slider, and as Michael suggested, if we plug that into the X, you'll see that, oh, we moved over, the X is now changed. It's starting at 0, and it's going over to 13. I can also plug, so I can plug this into multiple wire connectors or connectors. So let's say I wanted to make a true blue square, and I didn't want it to be a rectangle. I could also plug the 13 into the Y dimension, and you'll see that it is now extruding that square to be 13 and 13. If you really wanted to go buck wild, you could even plug this 13, since I want it to be a cube, into the height parameter. And now I have a 13 by 13 cube. So, and I can now start to change this and say I want this to grow. So we made the other one 50. So let's make the max 100. Okay. And then I can make this, I can scale this all the way up to 50. Boop, 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 come on, there we go. So now I have a cube that is 50 by 50, just like this guy is, right? The difference here is that this doesn't actually exist. Oh, that exists. move this over here. So this doesn't actually exist in Rhino right now. This is just a representation of what could exist in Rhino, right? If I hover over these, I can select them and do things. I hover over this, I can't do anything with that, this preview, because that's all it is a preview. Does anybody know how to actually get it into Rhino? So we have a cube.
You have to bake them or something, right?
Yeah, bake it. So if I hover over this last bit here and I right click on this node, I can bake this into Rhino. So if I click the bake button, it's going to ask me, oh, what layer do you want to put it on? I'll just pick layer 3 and I hit done, and you'll see now I now have an actual three-dimensional object that is the cube on layer 3. If I want it, but you'll notice that if I change the size of this, nothing happens to the baked object. So if I wanted to change it to this size, I would need to rebake this back in, and I would then have my smaller cube, and I could, you know, go on and on and on and on and on. So this is going to be, you know, the simplest version of something. This wouldn't be. This is way more steps than you need to take in order to make a cube. You probably would just make a cube in Rhino, but this gives you kind of the basic idea of how to start modeling things. So another way to get information into here, and this is kind of starts to get more at the parametric side of things, is let's say, hey, dog's going a little nuts. Oh, also I should note, if you double click on these nodes, you can rename them. So you can name this cube size and hit OK. And you'll see that it now changes the name here, so that way you can know what things are doing. Another easy thing to do to organize these, if you hover over a bunch of things and you kind of select a few things, you'll see, oh, you'll see that as I select things highlight as green. Basically anything I select in Grasshopper that's being previewed in Rhino will highlight as green. So if I select the box, that highlights. The cube size isn't anything, but sometimes it's good to see, like, oh, where's this showing up over here? So you kind of have a relationship between the two. If I hover over all of this, there are some like align tools that you can start to use that get a little, you know, get a little wonky when you can accidentally overlay things on top of each other. Another organization technique is right-clicking and Control-G, which basically makes a group so that I can easily move these things around. And if I wanted to note what this group did, I can use a command called scribble, and I could, you know, put a note here that says cube creation. I actually don't know. Can you group all of these together? Add to group. So then you can group the text inside of there, and then I know that, oh, that's where my cube is getting created. It doesn't sound like, oh, that seems ridiculous to do that right now, but trust me, when your definitions get very large, it'll be hard to find things sometimes, and this kind of organization can help. And I don't know that I've told you what a definition is, but this right here would be a definition, right? It's a group of nodes that do a thing. You're creating a definition of how to build this cube. The definition is these three things, and it's coming over into Rhino like that. So another way to potentially pull this to draw a cube in here that'd actually be a little more, you know, quote unquote parametric. I'm going to delete that input for a second, and I'm going to delete that as well. I can do this with just 2 nodes. So if I come up to geometry, there should, where are you? I guess I could do the curve. So I can say, hey, I want to grab a curve that I've already drawn in Rhino, right? So let's say I wanted to create a cube out of that, you know, square that we drew. If I right click on here, you'll see there's a bunch of different options. We'll get into some of them later, but I can set curves or multiple curves, right? So if I click set one curve, it's going to pop me over to Rhino. Grasshopper kind of disappears for a second. You'll see up here it says curve or edge to reference. So it's wanting you to select something. So if I select that, I've now popped back over, and you'll see that when I select this, that highlights green. I now have a rectangle selected that I have drawn in Rhino. And if I plug this into there, you'll see that, okay, it's starting to build a cube out of that curve. So if I'll just add in a number slider here. I probably shouldn't have deleted the one before. We'll make this a I'll plug this into here, like so. I now have a cube that is based off of a curve in Rhino. And the fun part about this potentially, this is why parametric tools are very powerful, is let's say I created a bunch of rectangles. I came back in here. I can select multiple curves, right? So if I select multiple curves and I grab these guys right here. Oops, let me delete these. I'm going to select multiple curves and I grab all of these. I right click as done. I now have a bunch of different cubes that all function the same and do the same, that are functioning off of one, a few nodes in Grasshopper. And let's say I moved one of these in Rhino, the cubes move with them, right? So, these are all the same height, so it may not be that useful to do for this, but let's say I had all of these generating different heights for some other reason. There's no reason why this number, this is just data, right? There's no reason why I can't go grab sun or wind data from somewhere and pump it into this number and say, oh, I want all the cubes to be relative to the miles per hour of wind on different times of the year or something. And then they all are shifting at different times or different heights. So this is just a kind of a value that we're plugging in, but any number or any set of numbers can kind of come into that, into this box. And if I add some panels, you can see what's kind of happening behind the scenes. So if I plug in this curve, you'll see that inside of this list, I have a list of different polylines. So these are all the things I selected. And if I pump this here, you'll see these are the boxes that are popped out that are coming out of this. So you can kind of see, there might be a time in the future where like, oh, I just need to grab the first in this list, or I need to grab the third item, or, you need to like parse this list out in different ways. You can see what data is coming out of this box or out of this node. So the panels can be useful to that. And then if I plug on past this, you still use that data for other things. And if I wanted to, I could right click this. I could bake all of these things, bake all of these boxes in here. And now I get a bunch of cubes. You can see that they all move because I'm selecting the curves as well. But if I just select that, I can see that I have all these different cubes popping out. Any questions related to kind of how these basic things are being created? And there's, you could do, that's like kind of just basically creating basic geometry. Trying to think of something, we could do if we wanted to create a quick, I think, rectangle. I'm trying to think of a way to kind of quickly make this into something a little more interesting.
I have a question.
Yes.
So the green blocks on your left, okay, the red ones on the left, yeah, okay. So those aren't real blocks, right? Those are
they're not real.
Right. So when the blue blocks were on top of those and you selected all of them, is there a way to just select the real blocks and move those separate from the?
Yeah. So what I was doing before. These red blocks, they're being created by taking that curve and pumping it into this node, right? We're taking the curve, we're putting it in here, and we're telling how far to extrude the box. When I selected them all before, I was also selecting the curve. So Grasshopper is still, it keeps track of that curve, like where is it? What's going on with it? So it moves the box, the preview, wherever that curve is. So if I wanted to, bake this in again, I pick layer 3, I hit OK. I minimize this for a second, and I come back over to Grasshopper, and I click on layer 3, and I hide everything else. I should now be able to grab all of these, move them, and the green box, the green previews will stay there because I'm not moving the, where are they? Okay, so I'm not moving this. I was turning off the layer in which that was on, so I'm not moving the curve in which is creating the box. Does that answer kind of your question, Laura Beth?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, that's how. So if I was to close out of Grasshopper, those green blocks will go away. They would disappear. They wouldn't be part. But if I saved it and I reopened it, as long as those curves still existed, it would still grab them the way that I'm currently selecting them. If I deleted any of them, or I deleted them and redrew them, or something like that, then the ones that I deleted or redrew in some way would disappear also. So you kind of need to, that's why it's sometimes better to create the rectangle in here, unless, because if another thing we could do is I can stretch this. So it's just tracking what the shape of that. So I can't do that. So you see here, when I make it not a rectangle, it doesn't make it not a rectangle. I'm not using the right node because this is only creating a rectangle. So I can't make a weird shape. I have to use I have to use an extrude command in order to get that kind of shape. But if I move it up, and, it tracks wherever that curve goes, and keeps generating that rectangle off of it. So let's see. What was I trying to do? Let me see if I can. So let's try a different thing real fast to kind of show. And we'll get a little deeper into this next class, but this might be the last thing to show for tonight. Let's say I had a bunch of points in here, and I'll put one out here. And let's say I wanted to do, has anybody heard the term of an attractor point? Heard that term before? In relation to see, I want to generate. So I want to basically start to create something that's actually parametric, that's reacting to something else. So I'm going to create circles. So I want to grab a bunch of points. So I'm going to create a circle at each one of these points minus that one, right? So here's the circle command, and you'll see that it's asking for base plane. It's not what I want. Radius. It's not what I want either. Maybe I don't need a circle. Maybe I can.
What I was saying earlier was if you go up to display and then click display or draw full names, it makes it so you don't have to hover.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't know that. Thank you, Nick. Appreciate that. You know, you might do this, and then depending on your nodes, they might get a little crazy. But that's good information. I didn't know you could do that. So what am I trying to do here? I want to. Okay, that's what I want. So I want to create a circle that is the center point is all of these, these points. So I had to find the right node, which is circle created by center, normal, and radius. So I'm going to select all these points. I'm going to go to set multiple points, select all of these, come back over here. I'm going to pick my center. I'm going to put in a number slider. Oops, what I wanted was a number. I'm going to do a number slider, like so. Make it to 100. I'm just kind of riffing here, so I might screw it up. We'll see what happens. Make this not 0. Okay, so I now have a circle generated around all of those points, right? And then let's say I wanted to extrude, whoops, a cylinder. So I guess I could extrude. So I can extrude all of these circles. So this needs a vector. We talked about vector before. So I'm going to go to my vector tool. I need to tell it which direction to go. So I want it to go upwards. So I want it to go in the Z direction. I'm going to pop that in there. You'll see that I have a tiny little extrusion. That's not really what I want though. Isn't going as smoothly as I thought it was going to go. What I'm looking for here. Y, radius. I swear there was a different cylinder. Baseline. Oh wait, did I? I'm gonna delete. That's not. All right. Well, let me think a better way to do this. Sorry, guys. I had an idea. Now I'm like stuck on it. Maybe do this. Offset curve. Here. Let's try a different version of this. We'll keep the points. We'll draw a line. So let's go to curve. We'll do a line from the start point and direction, right? So I'm going to, okay, this is my start point. This is my length. So now I'm drawing lines. Its direction is upwards, in the Z direction. So it's going in the Z. If I wanted to change the direction, I could, plug something in there. But I now have lines that are going up, from that start point, right? So then I could say, maybe I want to create a pipe around that line. So this is the pipe command. I can put a curve in here. So that's my curve. And then let's say I have a radius. I'm just going to copy that number slider and plug in a radius here. It gets a little crazy. So let's shrink that down a little. So now I have these pipes extruding up 63, you know, the number 63. But let's say I didn't want them to just be a solid number. Let's say I wanted them to be based on where this point is. So I could do, this is what's called an attractor point. So I'm going to delete that for a second. I'm going to look for a command called distance. So I just typed in distance there. And I basically have a thing that will say, what's the distance between 2 points? So I can pop in point B, which is all of my other points. And then I can grab, let me select the point from here, push it down. I'm going to set my other point for this one and plug it into point A. So if I put a panel here, I should have a series of distances. And that's the distance from this point to all of these other points. And now these are just numbers, right? So I can just take that number and plug it into the length. And now you'll kind of see that all of these are different heights. And if I was to move this around, they all start to change based on where that point is. So if the closer it is, the smaller the extrusion gets. The farther away it is, the bigger the extrusion gets. We'll get a little deeper into this next class, but you know, this is the kind of the start of like, I have an input, which is, you know, this point and its distance. I'm processing it by, you know, figuring out its distance from all the other points, and then my output is extruding a you know, a pipe around those different options. And if I wanted to, I could bake that in like that. I could select all those, and I have, you know, a series of pipes that are extruded at different heights based on, you know, the distance from this point. So this is kind of, you know, this is the super basic version of what you might start to do. Your versions will get more and more complicated, but you know, this is kind of the beginnings of parametric. You're processing data relative to these things. And if I came in here and I said, oh, I don't like where that cone is falling or this point is falling, I can start to manipulate these things, and the information still stays. It changes based on how far away it is from that and how close it is. But you know, that information is being, you know, reinterpreted every time I move one of these things. So
I have a question about the panel.
Mm-hmm.
So you have all of the numbers listed out. Is there a way to see like which number correlates to which pipe?
To which
In
point?
this case, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, the one way you could do it is you could select them in an order that you know, and the first one's going to be 0, the last one's going to be, you know, 7. You can also pull out, that's when you get into lists. So let me go into sets, and I can see my lists here, and I can start to, so like I said, the list is 0 to 7, and the index is where something is. So index is basically these numbers, 0, 1, 2, 3 through 7. This number is at index 2. This number here is at index 7. So if I wanted to start to see which list item retrieve is a item from the list. You can see that I have some of these list evaluation tools. So I could say, this is my, you know, so if I want to plug in a list, this is a list. I can plug in the list here. So right now, I'm going to turn off. So if I don't want to see the pipes for a second, or I don't want to see a preview, I can right click and I can turn off the preview. So I should, let me, so you can see, it's hard to see the point, but you can see when I select this, I select all the lines. But when I select this, I only get one line because this line is at index 0, right? So you can see right there where it says underneath one locally defined value 0. So automatically it's popping out whatever's at 0. So I'm getting that number right there. If I, if I created a slider here and I wanted to pop this, so to get the different ones, I need to plug in a different number at the index because I want a different, index. So I want index 3, for example. So if I make this, let me make this 7, okay. And I go to 3, I plug this into the index, and then I select on this one. You'll see that I'm getting that line now. If I, cycle through this, I get that line, I get, that line back there. So I'm pulling all the different values out, right? This is part of the reason why, creating things, if I were to create, I created these points, these are real points in Rhino. If I were to create those points in Grasshopper, I have a more predictable understanding of where they fall in that list based on how I create them. I just created them kind of willy-nilly and selected them willy-nilly. So they're kind of it's not as predictable as to where they are. So as you go down your path, it would probably be better to create these points in Rhino or in Grasshopper. Because when I create them in Grasshopper, I basically can say, okay, I want these points created this way, and I know where 0 is, and I can predict a little better where those numbers are. But if a quick way to find those, in this instance, they're all over the place. If you created a grid of them, then usually the first one, bottom, of the grid, this, the one in the bottom left corner is 0, and it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all the way over, and it kind of goes up that way. So in this instance, it's a little messy and probably not the best. This isn't the cleanest definition on the planet. So that's kind of a first dive into lists. Lists can, like I said, lists can get super complicated. You can have a list 0 that has 10 things in it. So you'd see a 0 here and then 10 items and then a 1 and then another 10 items and then a 2 and another 10 items. And you're kind of getting lists and sublists and things like that. So that's the easiest way to find it in this instance. Any other questions at the outset? You excited to jump into Grasshopper? Well, take your silence as just pure adulation of being able to finally jump in for a reason. So I'm going to stop recording. Oh, wait, let me see if there's chats. Yes. Earl, it requires 2 variables. What was that question regarding?
Why the cube command wasn't working. That was like way back when.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't see the chat pop up. Yeah, feel free to. And during these lectures, I just either don't notice it. Feel free to unmute. I usually will see somebody unmute and just interrupt. So I'm gonna stop recording.